Worship is entertainment. Worship is cold, dry education, as if somehow the sermon is what worship is, whereas teaching is nothing to do necessarily with worship, communion with God. These aspects are something that I want to share with people, and that's what the book and the paper is about.
And I want to explore more with you, too, this relationship between Orthodoxy and Catholicism and Protestantism and the ecumenical movement and so forth. We're going to do that in a moment. We're going to take a break right now. We hope you'll be back as we continue talking with Frank Schaeffer. Reading your book, Dancing Alone, listening to you here, you, and I would say, you know, appropriately so, have criticisms of the Protestant church, criticisms of the Catholic tradition, which ultimately led you to the Orthodox tradition. What kind of relationship would you like to see between these traditions? Is there something the Orthodox can learn from the Reformed and the Protestants? Certainly, you would say there's much we can learn from the Orthodox. How do we coexist in a world where we're not all overnight going to simply say, yep, you're right, this is a very anemic kind of religion, we better go back to the Orthodox tradition? That won't happen. How do we live, meanwhile, as we...
I think that's a great question, and I would put it this way. I think that there are two kinds of ecumenism or ecumenical movement. There's the one that we all know, and at least in my case, dislike so heartily, and that is what I'd call the ecumenism of unbelief. We're all adults here, we're all liberals, none of us take our traditions that seriously, so we can all get together and just talk theologically, and it's like these interfaith dialogues. This man's a Jew, someone's a Muslim, I'm supposedly a Christian, but I'll never mention Christ. The Jew's not going to talk about Palestine, and it becomes a kind of a conspiracy of silence about things that ought to be discussed. That's not the way to do it.
Right.
But I think there is an ecumenism of belief, which has nothing to do with pretending that we can just paper over our differences, but rather says, okay, let's look at this dying, secularized, hedonistic culture around us. We're all living in the new Sodom, whatever we believe. The capital of worldwide hedonism, right here in America.
North America.
North America.
Okay.
What do we do about that? What do we do about the abortion clinic on the corner? What do we do about the fact that in our schools we're teaching 8-year-olds how to use condoms before we're teaching them how to read? What do we do about the fact of what Richard John Newhouse talks about in his brilliant book published by Erdman's called The Naked Public Square? This syndrome where religious ideas and presuppositions are being thrown out of the public forum and not even allowed into the forum, where anybody who brings up one of these issues is labeled new religious right as a pejorative, say. How do we present a united front to our local school board when it comes to the fact that, yes, indeed, we believe, even for historical reasons, we should have some religious instruction in our schools, that you shouldn't have American history neutered of all religious involvement, that kids have got to know whether we like them or not, that the Puritans who came over came for religiously idealistic reasons, that this is history. So I think there is so much in what I would call our dying and sick American culture, because that's what it is, that we as people of the book, to use the Muslim phrase, can agree on, whether it is the sanctity of human life, the worthwhileness of education, because after all we all share the belief that man is created with a greater purpose than the gross national product, and that the reason for education is not just simply to train good workers. The reason is because we have souls and minds that are a gift from God, and these should be used and not thrown away. One of the great reform principles that came out of Calvinism, one of the positive aspects of it, this is something that we can talk about and agree on. So I would just say the kind of ecumenism that I think is useless is what I would call, quote, theological dialogue between people who are more interested in the social aspects of all getting together than they are in really talking about truth. I'd much rather sit down with a conservative or Orthodox Jewish rabbi who says, you're absolutely wrong about Jesus Christ. He is not the Son of God. However, what can we do about relativistic sex education in our schools? Than I would some smarmy Jewish rabbi of the Reformed tradition say, who doesn't even believe in his own Judaism, doesn't really expect me to believe in my Christ. And so we can kind of agree on a social agenda of wishy-washy platitudes of love and the brotherhood of mankind. So I'd say the way people of the book, people of faith, get on is by clearly stating their differences and then saying, nevertheless, we are citizens of this culture together. All of our traditions teach us that we should render to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God that which is God's. And what is Caesar's and what is God's? Let's discuss that. And then in that formulation, let's present a united front on some of these issues. So I don't see taking a strong position religiously, say me being Orthodox or you being Protestant, as a barrier to both of us being on the local fire department, and if we get called, we put the fire out, whatever that fire might be.
But meanwhile, I get the impression, though, that you would encourage me to look seriously at the Orthodox tradition and to experience the fullness of Christianity by perhaps moving closer to it.
Look, I would on two fronts. On a national front, when you look at the direction that pluralistic American Protestant culture is headed, if this isn't cause for a second look, I don't know what is. I mean, after all, in 1989, the latest year that statistics are available, as I say in my book, Dancing Alone, I cite it in a footnote, the United Nations Census on Worldwide Religions says there are now 23,000 Protestant denominations, with an average of 5 new ones being added a week. Now, let's just talk Turkey here. You think this is what John Calvin had in mind?
I don't think so.
No, I don't either, because I don't think he was a lunatic.
Right, right.
I mean, obviously, this is not what the Reformers had in mind either. So let the debate begin. Is this just a perversion of the Reformed heritage, or did something go off the rails, or is there something about the Western tradition, notice I didn't say Protestant, that Augustinian, scholastic rationalism that you have in the West, that you see particularly St. Thomas Aquinas, that scholastic tradition, the apotheosis of which is the Council of Dort, and their 5 resolutions, which is the most scholastic statement of faith in God that you can find. The Orthodox would say it is heretical because it puts God in a scholastic box as if somehow we have described God's character. Whereas the teaching of the church has always been, I mean the Orthodox Church, you can't put God in a box, and not only is salvation a mystery, but what we don't know about God is the only thing we can really say, in the sense that we are human and God is God, and when it comes to these questions of predestination and free will, and when it comes to this sort of Augustinian take on Paul's statements that we would feel would have been taken grossly out of context on the whole idea of predestination, or the election to salvation on one hand and damnation on the other. The problem with all this from the Orthodox position is that it's over-rationalistic. It puts too much faith in the human mind and not enough in God and not enough in the mystery of spirituality. And we would say it isn't that we have an alternative dogma. You know, the Reformed theologian always would expect, okay, well, what are your 5 points then? Right. It would be, there are no 5 points. Salvation and holiness and grace are mysteries. You know, the idea would be God is bigger than we are, and the words we use about God, even the words in the Bible used to describe Him, after all, are just human words to describe something outside of time and space. Who are we to lay out this rationalistic little grid of beliefs and dogma? So I think a lot of Protestants would think that somehow Orthodoxy is closer to Roman Catholicism because of the outward rubrics of vestments or something. Sure. It's actually not true. Dogmatic Reformed Calvinism is closer to dogmatic Roman Catholicism than either of them are to Orthodoxy. And that's something I think anyone who reads my book, Dancing Alone, will come to realize, that whatever else they take from the book, they are going to at least understand that when you lump Orthodox and Catholics together as if some Protestants are different, that really the Western tradition is more similar than it is different. It's different in superficial things like what priests wear, or the order of service, but it's the same in that all the Protestant traditions, from charismatic to Reformed, tend, especially on the Reformed side, tend to put what we would feel from an Orthodox position is way too much faith in human reason. And we would say that it is the same departure from the biblical viewpoint that the complete secularists of the Enlightenment took when they said, okay, the way I put it in my book is I say this, the Reformers said sola scriptura. Right. The Enlightenment thinkers of the humanists just took it one step further. They said, what do you mean sola scriptura? How about just sola, me alone? Why the scriptura? Whereas the church is always saying it's not me alone anything. It's the community of belief, experiencing the love of God, which is a holy mystery beyond human contemplation. So the funny thing is, from a Protestant point of view, when you look at something like the Council of Dort, the Protestants always saying, well, what's your alternative? The Orthodox is saying the problem isn't they got the wrong 5 points. The problem is you can't make 5 points about grace and God and salvation. Sure. And what you do is have to accept some of these things truly on the basis of faith and mystery and love and these kinds of things. It's a very different take. You know, it's right off the map. So the funny thing is, if you got Thomas Aquinas and John Calvin in a room, they'd understand each other perfectly. You put the Orthodox into the mix, he'd be the odd man out. Because Aquinas and Calvin would be speaking each other's language, which is the Western idea of rationalism. It's the mathematical approach to reality. The Eastern Orthodox person would keep saying, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, but isn't God bigger than this? What about spirituality? What about experience? What about worshiping with your whole body, wherein when you make your sign of the cross or you make a prostration before the altar, that's worship too. You could be an illiterate mute, and that's as worshipful as a theological pronouncement, because God sees the heart. And so, see, he's kind of right out of the theological debate. And I hope some of that comes through in the book, Dancing Alone.
And I think it does. Frank Schaeffer, thank you for being with us on Calvin Forum. Thank you for watching.